Hi everyone, welcome to week 7 of CAT 125R. This week in your sections, as I'm sure you're very well aware, you'll be presenting your Ignite style speeches. So as you're working on putting the finishing touches on those speeches, I wanted to use this video to look ahead just a little bit toward your final assignment in the class, which is a collaborative curation assignment in which you'll be addressing a question about intellectual property in the age of the internet. Let's get started. Your final assignment in the course asks you to work in groups to develop a researched response to a smaller research question under this big research umbrella of what is intellectual property in the age of the internet. So as you get started thinking about this question, I would encourage you to skip ahead a bit in the course to the lectures in Module 10. Those two videos, the two Zaption tours done by Professor Elizabeth Losh, will give you a fantastic overview of what we mean when we use the term intellectual property and what we mean by the term copyright. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those as you get started. You'll see in those videos some fields affected by intellectual property concerns, and this is really just a very small sampling of a huge range of fields that we could draw from. Things like music, film, visual art, graphic design, publishing, education, and academic research or scholarship are all areas where intellectual property comes into play. One way to start thinking about this question of intellectual property would be to think about who owns your work as a student. You are frequently asked to submit your work to various websites or platforms as a student. Of course, in this class, we ask you to upload your work to the course website via Canvas. One of the major questions about intellectual property as it relates to student work comes about when we think about Turnitin.com, which I'm sure is a website many of you are familiar with. In one of the course readings for week 10, rhetorician Barclay Barrios writes about the visual design of the user agreements for Turnitin. So you might think about what engagements do you have with intellectual property on a very regular basis. So if we look at, this is a bit of an excerpt of the user agreement, the current user agreement for Turnitin. So I've excerpted it here, and let's kind of take a look at some of the key words in the agreement. So the agreement says that as a user of the site, you are granting a non-exclusive, royalty-free, perpetual, worldwide, irrevocable license to reproduce, transmit, display, disclose, and otherwise use your communications. So you'll see here I've highlighted, we are free to use your ideas, right? That's a particular phrase that's of significance. The site is also free to use those ideas for any purpose, right? So including but not limited to the development and use of products and services based on those communications. So Turnitin is allowed to use your work for their own purposes in this scenario. Your work as a student, an instructor's work who submits assignments to the class or who comments on student work through the class. So let's compare that user agreement to another one that you may be familiar with or that you may be a user of this site. So this is the user agreement for Twitter. And right away, the thing I want to point out to you is you see it's broken up into multiple sections. So we have the first section, which is sort of the part of the agreement written in legalese, right, in the sort of higher level, highfalutin language of legal jargon. And then underneath that part of the agreement is this smaller section with the subheading of tip, right? And this is where the legal jargon is translated in some sense for the audience. So here we see that, and this is the pattern for the entire agreement, right? There are these sections and then followed by a tip. So here it's broken down into a very simple phrase. What's yours is yours. You own your content and your photos are part of that content. So here we have two very different user agreements, both in terms of what rights you as a user are granting the site, but also very different in the way they are written, right? The Twitter agreement is a bit more simple, a bit more accessible, whereas the Turnitin agreement requires a bit more expertise to understand and make a decision about. So just something to think about as you get started thinking about intellectual property. This is one example of the way it might play out in the age of the internet. You can continue to think of many others, and if you take a look at those week 10 videos, it'll give you even more ideas as you get started with your assignment. Thanks and good luck this week.